All right, guys, welcome back once again to the personal safety module of our basic search operations class. And we have one last slide to get through, and that is regarding managing risk. We've spent a good amount of slides here over the past module discussing scenarios of what could go wrong on a search or could impact individual searchers. Whenever you look at the team structure, the search leaders are ultimately accountable for the overall safety of a mission, but each individual searcher is responsible for their own safety. This means you need to follow team protocols, you need to wear your appropriate PPE, you need to apply your training, you need to seek continual training, being self-aware, and probably the most important thing that you can do is know when to say no. For those of you that are familiar with TV personality Mike Rowe, he was very he created quite a bit of controversy by famously quipping that safety third, which is counter to many organizations and businesses that claim that safety comes first. They promote the idea of safety first. It's always on posters and banners that this is the organizational stance, the organizational mission is to have a safety first culture. And he may create a lot of controversy whenever he came at this, saying that safety came third. Whenever you listen to the logic, it makes a lot of sense, though. Whenever you look at business objectives and organizational missions, businesses are in the business of making money, and organizations are out to fulfill a mission. Profits and mission statements are usually what comes first. I know there was one instance where Mike Rowe was challenged on this by a professional safety manager, and Mike just asked the manager if he works for free, and then whenever the safety manager said, "Well, no, of course not," that's where Mike Rowe countered by saying, "Well, then money comes first. It's not safety; it's money comes first. If safety came first, then you would do it for free." So. And the whole point of him saying what he is trying to say here with safety third is safety is important, but claims like safety first create a misleading philosophy for who is ultimately responsible for your safety. And it's each search operator's responsibility to operate in a risk-aware mindset and advocate for themselves whenever it comes to operational safety. During search missions, you will encounter numerous hazards. We spent this entire module talking about the hazards that may be present for you out there in the field. And each one of those hazards can present varying levels of risk. Anything from something where you can, quickly mitigate by, assessing a plan, putting on proper PPE, or all the way to the extreme where we are no longer safe to do this job. We need to take a step back. Everything can't be covered in a safety briefing. So whenever you do encounter risk, consider the 4 strategies for managing personal risk. The first of which is to mitigate the risk. One of the first lines of mitigation is our team's standards and protocols. This can be team standards and protocols for fitness, for training, for operational response, for performing risk assessments prior to going into a mission. If there are team standards on your team, you need to adhere to those. Those are there to mitigate a risk. If they don't exist on your team, then we need to make them. We need to make a standard for these, so that way at the end of the day, we can operate safely and everyone can go home the way they came. Okay. That's one way to mitigate risk. Another way to mitigate risk is wear your appropriate PPE and carry the right equipment. If you're searching at night or in heavily vegetated areas, wear eye protection and head protection. If you're working in steep terrain or near moving water or around rocky ledges, throw on a helmet, throw on some head protection. If you're working near water, whether it's moving or still water, throw on a life jacket, throw on gloves whenever you're working in wooded areas or when climbing over obstacles. Always wear long sleeves, even whenever it's hot, to protect yourself from bumping up against something that could potentially give you a rash later on. Wear your sunscreen and wear your insect repellent. These are all things and all tools that are designed to mitigate some risk. And these are things that you have to do, even if you look goofy doing it. There's a reason why, and it could potentially save you some potential harm later on down the road. I'm the first one to raise my hand and say there have been plenty of times where I did not wear PPE the way I should, or I did something that I really did not consider the risk, and I got burned on it. I walked away with some nasty contact derma, or I injured myself in some silly, goofy way that put myself out of commission, or I got heat exhaustion to the point where I could no longer operate because I did not adhere to the standards. I did not set standards for myself. I did not adhere to team standards, and I was not wearing the appropriate PPE. And sometimes you got to learn the hard way, but this is a lesson that you do have to learn at some point to keep yourself safe. So mitigating risk is one way. Transferring risk is another way. Whenever we talk about transferring risk, there's typically two ways we can do this. The first way is for your team to have some kind of insurance, or you have some kind of a workman's compensation through your state. I know in Kentucky, where I came from, that was one of the benefits of completing a basic search and rescue program and becoming a certified search and rescue technician, is you were protected under workman's compensation. For some teams that are nonprofit organizations, you may purchase insurance on your team to protect if someone gets hurt or injured while on the job. That's one way of transferring risk, and but that's transferring risk in the way of from a financial standpoint. In terms of transferring risk in the field, that's when we start looking at calling in specialized teams that are trained to do the work around the hazard that we've identified. We identify some high angle areas. We don't want to send teams in there. We want to call in a high angle team. We come across some moving water, and we have reason to think that it may be appropriate for us to search that as part of our mission. We don't want to send our own people in there. We want to call in a team that's trained in that. That's how we transfer that risk. That's how we put that onto something else and let them carry that forward. Okay, that's another way to manage risk. The third way is to avoid risk altogether. That's whenever you may look at a situation or you may look at a hazard, and you say, I'm not going to put myself or I'm not going to put my team in the position to be affected by that hazard. So we are just not going to accept that assignment. We may push that portion of the assignment to the side and save it for a specialized team down the road. But this is something that we are not going to do. If you are given an assignment that's beyond the scope of your training or your PPE, you absolutely have the right to refuse to do that. You absolutely have the right to say, I am not equipped, or I'm not trained to deal with this. I am concerned for my personal safety. I will not accept this assignment. And that's, as a search leader, that's fine. I understand that. And honestly, shame on me as a search leader for not understanding what your capabilities are and asking you to put yourself in a situation, and putting you in a situation where you have to tell me no. That's my failure as a leader, to not recognize what you're capable of or what you're not equipped for. So avoid risk by saying no. And then lastly, the last strategy for managing risk is accepting it. And we only want to accept risk when the risk to life or safety of yourself or your teammates is reduced to an acceptable level, whether that's from mitigation, transfer, or the absence of risk altogether. The only way that we accept that risk is whenever the residual risk is low enough for us to operate safely. Again, we all go home the same way that we came in. We don't want to get anybody hurt. We don't want to have any of those painful conversations with family members later on, because we chose to ignore risk. Ignoring risk is not on the list here. It's one of these four options, and ignoring risk is not one of them. So having a risk management strategy and a risk management policy on your team is very crucial. But if nothing else, you should at least adopt this philosophy for yourself personally, so that way whenever you are in the field and you are exposed to a hazard, you can properly assess the situation and determine what's the right way to manage this risk. So that brings us to the end of the personal safety portion of our basic search operations course. I very much thank you for listening to this video and the ones that came before it, and we look forward to bringing you guys the next module in our program.